I got shoved out of my own Thanksgiving dinner. Like I was trash. Yeah, you heard that right. My family, people I trusted, people who swore they loved me, literally didn't leave me a chair at the table. I stood there frozen while everyone else laughed and clinked their glasses, pretending I didn't exist. And in that moment, something in me shifted. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was shocked. My daughter barely looked up from her phone. My son-in-law smirked, like it was a joke he'd been waiting to tell for weeks. "Oh, there's always standing room, right?" he said, like I was invisible, and somehow that was funny. No one apologized. No one even noticed the humiliation. The family I thought had my back had turned into strangers in an instant. And the weird thing, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just put on my coat and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, and I swear I could hear their relief. Like I'd finally exited the scene and they could breathe again. But here's the kicker. They thought this was the end, that I'd disappear quietly, that I'd vanish like I'd never mattered. That night, as I stood on the sidewalk, feeling the chill of late November air bite at my cheeks, I realized something important. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't broken. I was planning. Because what they didn't see, their blind spot, was the storm that starts quietly. The real power isn't in screaming or throwing tantrums. It's in patience, in observation, in collecting every little detail they thought went unnoticed. Over the next few months, I started a process so subtle it almost seemed like nothing was happening. Banks? I started quietly talking to them, documenting years of overlooked financial dependency. Schools? Teachers began noting signs of anxiety and distress in the kids, all officially logged. Therapists? They noted patterns of exclusion, emotional harm, and neglect. Social services? A file quietly opened. All of it invisible. All of it slow, and all of it building to a point that would shake the foundations of the life they'd so carefully curated. They thought the only consequence was me walking out that night. They had no clue the real reckoning was just beginning. And the crazy part? No one saw it coming. Not even a hint. But here's the thing. They were about to find out. And when they did, it would change everything. You think walking out was the end? Nah. That was just the opening move. What happened next didn't explode. It dismantled their lives quietly, piece by piece, and they had no idea it was coming. You might think the real drama started at the dinner table. Nah, that was just the trailer. The real story? It started in plain sight, where no one bothered to look. Because here's the thing. You can't see someone quietly building a storm until it hits. And I wasn't just sitting around, feeling sorry for myself. I was moving. Slowly, strategically, deadly. First stop, the banks. I started digging through years of financial statements, forgotten accounts, subtle dependencies. Every loan co-signed, every overdraft forgiven, every favor they assumed I'd forget. I was jotting it all down. Nothing flashy. Nothing confrontational, just small, quiet phone calls, questions about policies, documentation requests. Each one seemed like nothing to the people on the other end, but it added up. And when the time came, it would be undeniable. Next, the schools. I met with teachers, counselors, even principals, under the guise of casual concern. Just worried about how the kids are coping, I'd say. Voice soft, eyes calm. But behind that calm was a subtle pressure. Notes were taken, patterns were recognized. Anxiety, withdrawal, signs of neglect. Stuff they might have dismissed if it was random. But patterns can't be ignored. And no one thought it was connected to me. Oh, They had no clue. Therapists, same game. I met with them, shared observations, subtly highlighted patterns. It seems like there's emotional harm happening at home, I'd say, letting them connect the dots on their own. And the social workers, they quietly opened a file. Nothing public, nothing dramatic, just official records quietly building in the background. Here's the beauty of it. I wasn't screaming, I wasn't threatening, I wasn't forcing anything. I was being invisible, unnoticeable. The family carried on like nothing was happening. They laughed at the next dinner, bragged about their perfect kids, flaunted their wealth. They thought they'd won, and all the while, I was winning in a way they'd never see coming. They thought I'd forgotten that night. They thought nothing had changed. But the quiet storm was building, and when it hit, it would be total chaos, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. You ever think someone's gone quietly, only to realize they've been plotting your downfall the whole time? That's exactly what happened. See, the months after that Thanksgiving were supposed to be ordinary. Family dinners, holiday plans, the usual happy chaos. But little by little, cracks started showing, and the family didn't even know why. It began with the banks. Calls started coming in. Questions, forms that needed signatures, accounts that couldn't just stay open anymore. The favor accounts they'd leaned on for years? Suddenly, there were limits. Access was restricted. It was subtle, nothing dramatic at first, just enough to make them squirm. The panic in their eyes when they realized the money they assumed was theirs by default wasn't guaranteed anymore. Priceless. The panic in their eyes when they realized the money they assumed was theirs by default wasn't guaranteed anymore. Priceless. Then schools got involved. Reports started surfacing, notes about anxiety, emotional distress, and patterns of neglect that couldn't be ignored. Teachers started calling meetings with parents, asking hard questions. "We're concerned about the kids," they'd say. A family brushed it off at first, thinking it was overreaction. But once a few teachers chimed in, then the counselors, it snowballed. Suddenly, the perfect image of their family wasn't so perfect. Therapists chimed in too. The notes weren't just casual observations anymore. They were documented patterns of emotional harm, exclusion, and psychological stress. Social services quietly followed up, checking in with records, asking questions. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, but the pressure was real, and it was relentless, creeping in from every direction. Here's the thing about building a storm quietly. It's terrifying for the people on the other side. You don't see it coming until it's too late. One by one, their defenses started to crack. Every denial, every excuse, every "it's fine" moment became weaker. They thought they could control the narrative. They were dead wrong. And the funniest part? They had no idea who to blame. They looked around for someone to fight with, someone to confront, someone to yell at. But the person who started it all had vanished into the shadows months ago. I wasn't there. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't screaming. I was invisible, and that invisibility was my weapon. By now, the illusion of control they'd so carefully built, the perfect house, perfect kids, perfect life, was starting to fracture. The kind of fracture that doesn't heal quietly either. The world outside their little bubble was starting to notice cracks too. Banks, schools, social workers, therapists, all questioning, all documenting, all quietly dismantling the narrative they'd relied on for years. And that's when the first panic hit. Not the money, not even the kids. The panic hit their ego, their reputation, their perfect family story. It started to crumble, piece by piece, like a house of cards in a windstorm. They thought life was going to continue as usual. But when the cracks widened quietly, The fall comes faster than anyone expects, and they were about to find out how fast. By the time the next family dinner rolled around, something had shifted. You could feel it in the air. The smiles were tighter, the laughs shorter, the conversations guarded. Something invisible was pressing down on them, and they had no clue what or who was causing it. They thought it was just life, just random bad luck. But nah, it was me. I showed up like nothing had changed. Casual coat, calm demeanor, pretending to be just another guest. But inside, I was all eyes and ears. Every subtle glance, every nervous laugh, every overcompensated apology from them was fuel. And oh, did they need to apologize. The weirdest part? They didn't even realize I was there to observe. My presence alone started shifting the dynamic. Suddenly, the son-in-law who'd taken my chair months ago was unusually polite, careful with his words. My daughter seemed tense, like she knew something was coming, but didn't know what. And the parents? Sweating, avoiding eye contact, desperately trying to maintain the perfect family illusion. Here's where it got interesting. I had a little surprise tucked in my coat. Not a gun, not a bomb. Something far more effective in dismantling them slowly. Recordings. Conversations from months prior. Subtle moments of them mocking, ignoring, and underestimating me. Nothing dramatic in isolation, but when you string them together, it told a story they couldn't deny. A story of neglect, exclusion, and outright disregard. I didn't play them. I didn't call them out in front of everyone at first. That would have been too obvious, too loud. Instead, I let the tension simmer. Little hints, a casual question here, a pointed remark there. I watched their discomfort grow like a storm cloud forming on the horizon. Every glance I gave them was a reminder. I see you. I remember. And I'm not powerless. They tried to laugh it off, of course. Oh, come on. We didn't mean... My niece jumped in to rescue them, but the energy in the room had shifted. You could taste the fear. Not fear of me, nah, that would be too obvious. But fear of consequences, fear of exposure, fear of the world finally seeing what they were. And slowly, quietly, without me even raising my voice, the illusion started cracking. By the end of the night, the first real panic hit. They realized things weren't under control anymore. That perfect little picture they'd painted for years, it was fading, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. No apologies, no charm, no flattery could patch the holes I'd been quietly poking for months. And the twist? They still didn't know I'd started all this months ago. They thought the chaos was random, some bad luck, some misstep. Little did they know it was planned. Carefully, patiently, deadly quietly. They were starting to realize something was seriously wrong, but they still had no idea who was behind it. And the real consequences? They were just getting started. By now, the cracks weren't just visible, they were widening fast. What started as subtle pressure months ago was now hitting the family where it hurt the most. Money, reputation, and control. And the wild part? They had no clue who or what was behind it. It started with the finances. Banks were suddenly asking questions, requesting documents, and limiting access to accounts they had always assumed were theirs. Loans that had been forgiven without a second thought were suddenly in review. Funds they relied on for emergencies weren't just handed over automatically anymore. I watched from the sidelines as panic flickered across their faces. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. But it was enough. Enough to start cracking the facade of control they'd built over decades. Then came the institutions, schools, therapists, and social services began connecting the dots. Patterns they had ignored were now undeniable. Reports of anxiety, distress, and neglect were no longer scattered notes. They were a timeline. And once institutions start connecting timelines, trust erodes fast. Teachers called meetings with parents, therapists sent formal letters, and social workers quietly intervened. The family tried to downplay it at first, but you can't hide official documentation. The walls of their perfect life were starting to shake. And the social fallout? That was the kicker. Word travels fast when things are documented and noticed by the right people. Friends and neighbors began questioning, whispering. People stopped returning calls. Invitations to events mysteriously disappeared. The family's image of perfection, once polished and untouchable, was suddenly tarnished. The fear in their eyes wasn't about money or reports. It was about being exposed, being judged, being seen as liars. And no amount of charm or deflection could fix that. I didn't gloat. I didn't even confront them. All I did was exist, quietly watching as the consequences I had patiently orchestrated unfolded. The most beautiful part? It was all natural. The family thought the chaos was random, some bad luck or coincidence. They didn't realize the strings had been pulled months ago, silently, invisibly, with precision. By now, every family dinner, every conversation, every interaction was tinged with tension. The laughter felt forced, smiles were tight, and the energy in the room had shifted. They weren't just worried about me. They were worried about what the world would think when the truth came out. And it would come out. Eventually. Slowly, yes, but with unstoppable momentum. And the truth? The truth was simple. The family hadn't lost control because of some dramatic confrontation. They hadn't lost control because of yelling, threats, or violence. They lost because someone they thought was powerless had been quietly preparing, collecting evidence, and letting their own actions and words unravel the facade of perfection they relied on. And the final twist of this phase, they still didn't know I was behind it. Every panic, every fear, every whispered apology to each other, they believed it was coincidence. But I knew better. And the endgame was closer than they thought. They thought life was just tricky, luck gone wrong. But the real reckoning was about to hit hard, and nothing could stop it. What happens next? It's when the world starts noticing, and their perfect life starts crumbling completely. By this point, the family wasn't just uneasy. They were unraveling. All those years of pride, carefully crafted appearances, and so-called perfect life were crumbling. And it was beautiful, in a quiet, almost surgical way. And the craziest part? They still had no clue it wasn't random. They thought it was bad luck, coincidence, karma. But nah, it was me. Doors that used to swing open effortlessly started slamming shut. Business contacts who once smiled at every call suddenly didn't return calls. Friends they'd leaned on for favors began avoiding them. Invitations disappeared. Reputation? Gone. Credibility? Shattered. Their polished image was cracking faster than a dry sidewalk in the winter. And the cracks weren't cosmetic. Money wasn't the worst part. Yeah, that was inconvenient, stressful, and embarrassing. But the real sting? People stopping trust, opportunities disappearing, and social networks evaporating quietly. It's one thing to be financially limited. It's another to realize the world sees you differently now. That your word no longer carries weight. That every interaction is shadowed by doubt. And that's what they were feeling every single day. The family tried to patch it, of course. Apologies flew. Charm was deployed, and desperate explanations were thrown around at lightning speed. "We just had a rough patch. It's nothing serious." But you can't patch credibility once it's gone. You can't smile your way back from documented patterns of neglect and financial mismanagement. The narrative they'd relied on for years, gone, completely dismantled. Meanwhile, I stayed in the shadows, observing, patient. No screaming, no confrontation, just quiet satisfaction. I had built this slowly, piece by piece, watching as the dominoes fell exactly as planned. And the thing about dominoes, one wrong push, even invisible, sets off a chain reaction you can't stop. And the twist? The family still believed they were in control. They didn't know this collapse was orchestrated, methodical, calculated over months. They thought life had betrayed them, that karma had caught up, that maybe the universe was just cruel. But nah, it wasn't random. Not at all. And when they finally realized the truth, man, the shock would be total. By now, the tension in the house was palpable. Every dinner, every casual conversation, every small interaction was tinged with fear and suspicion. They were looking over their shoulders, second-guessing their own words, and trying to control a narrative they no longer had power over. And all of it, quietly orchestrated by the person they had dismissed, ignored, and tried to erase. Me. And that's the beautiful part. There was no dramatic confrontation, no yelling, no chaos in public, just a slow, unstoppable erosion of everything they thought mattered. Money, reputation, trust, gone. And all because someone they assumed was powerless refused to be invisible. They thought their world was intact, their control unshakable. But when the foundation crumbles quietly, there's nothing left to hold on to. And the final twist, they were about to realize who had been pulling the strings all along. The thing about quiet storms, people don't see them coming until they're drowning in the aftermath. And by now, the family was gasping for air. Doors had closed, calls weren't returned, opportunities vanished. Their perfect life? Shattered. But here's the kicker. They still didn't know who had orchestrated it. Then it hit them. Slowly at first, like a whisper they couldn't ignore. Patterns started making sense. The way the banks tightened restrictions. The way school reports suddenly got serious. The way social workers and therapists seemed unusually informed. It all pointed to one person. Me. And the realization hit like a truck. I had never left. I had never vanished. I had been there all along, quietly dismantling their lives, piece by piece. You could see it in their eyes. Shock, fear, regret, anger. And the funniest part? They didn't know how to respond. Their mouths opened and closed, searching for words, for excuses, for some way to regain control. But there wasn't any. Every move they'd made to dismiss, ignore, or humiliate me had been quietly recorded, documented, and used against them in ways they hadn't imagined. It wasn't revenge. Not really. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't trying to humiliate them in public. All I did was reveal the truth. And the truth is powerful, man. It's patient. It's quiet. And when it lands, it hits harder than any fight ever could. They realized they had been living in a bubble, a fake perfect world built on arrogance and neglect. And now that bubble had popped. Friends and family who once nodded politely at their stories were gone. Banks, schools, and institutions had started asking questions they couldn't ignore. Their credibility was shot. Their moral standing? Non-existent. And all of it traced back to me, the one they assumed was invisible, powerless, nothing. And here's the beauty of it. They had no one to blame but themselves. Every slight, Every dismissal, every act of exclusion had been noted. Every opportunity to act kindly and fairly they had ignored, they had squandered. And now the consequences weren't just financial or social. They were psychological. The guilt, the fear, the regret, all stacked up like bricks on their chests. They sat there, stunned, realizing too late that I had been preparing this for months, quietly and patiently. I didn't need to scream, argue, or demand. I simply let their own actions and the systems around them reveal the truth. And the most powerful part, they couldn't deny it. By the time the realization fully hit, their world had already shifted. The illusion of control, perfection, and superiority they had so carefully built was gone. And all it took was one person, someone they underestimated, someone they tried to erase, to quietly show them how powerless they really were. They finally understood the truth, but by then it was too late. Their world had already crumbled, and the one they thought was powerless, she was in full control. And what happened next would leave them completely exposed. By now, there was no pretending. The family's perfect life had completely unraveled, piece by piece, quietly but relentlessly. Banks refused access. Schools and social workers were asking questions that couldn't be ignored. Friends and acquaintances stopped returning calls. Their reputation, the one they had spent decades polishing, was in ruins. And the strangest part? It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't messy. It was silent, precise, and unstoppable. They looked at me, finally, with eyes wide open. Eyes that had once ignored me, dismissed me, and treated me like I didn't exist. And for the first time, they saw me clearly. Not just me, but the truth behind every slight, every moment of exclusion, every act of neglect. They realized I had never been powerless. I had never been invisible. I had been preparing, patiently, calmly, completely. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't deliver speeches. I just let their own actions, their own arrogance, and their own systems reveal the truth. And when it landed hard. Every apology they offered, every desperate attempt to regain control was useless. Because the story wasn't about revenge. It was about reality. Reality doesn't care about excuses. Reality doesn't bend for arrogance or pride. Reality shows up quietly, consistently, and then leaves you to face the consequences. And that was the lesson. The lesson they hadn't learned when they humiliated me at the dinner table, thinking I'd crumble and disappear. I had dismantled the illusion of perfection they had built. I had reclaimed the respect they never gave me. And I had done it not with anger, but with patience, intelligence, and quiet determination. As they sat there, stunned and speechless, I realized something myself. Power isn't about loud declarations. It isn't about revenge. It isn't about making someone fall. It's about proving to yourself first that you were never powerless at all. And in that silence, I walked away one last time, leaving them to pick up the pieces of the life they had built on ignoring, dismissing, and underestimating me. Because sometimes the strongest statement a person can make isn't in confrontation. It's in quiet preparation, patience, and letting the truth speak louder than anger ever could. And as I walked into my own life, free and unshakable, I realized the most powerful thing anyone can ever do is quietly reclaim themselves. And nothing, not even the world, can take that away.